My family canceled my invitation to Thanksgiving. Hours later, they turned on the TV and froze at what they saw. The text came while I was stirring cranberry sauce in my tiny apartment kitchen. "Sorry, Rachel, but we've decided to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Just immediate family." Immediate family. As if being their daughter for 28 years didn't qualify me for that category anymore. As if choosing social work over law school had somehow revoked my membership in the Morrison clan. What my family didn't know as they gathered around their perfectly set table that evening was that 3 miles away, I was about to receive the call that would change everything. And when they flipped on the news after dinner, expecting to see the usual holiday fluff pieces, they'd watch their disappointing daughter accept the governor's award for outstanding public service, live on television. Drop a comment below if you know what it's like to be written off by the people who should celebrate you most. This one's for everyone who's ever been told they don't measure up. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 5 years building a career in social work while my family treated it like an extended rebellion phase. What they saw as wasted potential helping other people's problems, I knew was the work that would define my life's purpose. The Morrison family had built their identity around professional achievement and financial success. Dad, William Morrison, was a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms. Mom Catherine had her own practice specializing in corporate law and served on the boards of 3 major nonprofit organizations. My older brother David, 31, had followed the golden path by graduating from Harvard Law and joining Dad's firm as a rising associate. His 6-figure salary, downtown condo, and engagement to another lawyer's daughter represented everything my parents valued in professional accomplishment. My sister Jennifer, 25, was completing her final year at Stanford Law, already with offers from 2 top-tier firms and a summer internship at a federal appellate court. Her trajectory toward legal success made family dinners feel like strategy meetings for the Morrison legal dynasty. Then there was me, the daughter who'd graduated from University of Washington with a degree in social work and had spent 5 years working with at-risk youth in Seattle's most challenging neighborhoods. While David discussed case law and Jennifer analyzed constitutional theory, I talked about trauma-informed care and community intervention programs. Rachel works with troubled teenagers, became Mom's diplomatic explanation at cocktail parties. Very noble work, though not particularly financially sustainable. The subtext was clear. Rachel chose idealism over practicality and would eventually need to get serious about her career prospects. My starting salary as a social worker was $42,000 annual, less than what David spent on his car payments. My caseload included kids aging out of foster care, teenagers struggling with addiction, and families dealing with poverty, violence, and systemic obstacles that legal solutions couldn't address. But what my family saw as a burden, I experienced as a purpose. Every teenager I helped graduate high school, every family I connected with mental health services, every crisis I helped de-escalate represented an impact that couldn't be measured by billable hours or partnership tracks. The disconnect became painful during family gatherings, where conversation naturally gravitated toward legal victories, client acquisitions, and professional advancement that I couldn't contribute to or relate to. "Rachel, how's your little nonprofit job going?" Uncle Thomas would ask with patronizing affection during holiday dinners. "Still trying to save the world. One teenager at a time. I work for Seattle Department of Human Services, managing intervention programs for at-risk youth," I'd correct, but the distinction was lost on relatives who saw all social work as essentially the same charitable activity. "Very admirable," Aunt Margaret would add with the tone people use when discussing hobbies rather than careers. Though I imagine it must be emotionally draining, dealing with all those problems you can't really solve. The assumption that my work was futile, that poverty, addiction, and trauma were problems too big for individual intervention, reveal how little my family understood about what social workers actually accomplished, or how systemic change happened through direct service. But the conversation that crystallized their dismissal happened during last year's Thanksgiving, when Dad made his annual toast about family achievements and professional success. "David won his first major case this year," he announced proudly. "Jennifer received the highest honors in her constitutional law seminar. Both of my children are building careers that will make lasting impacts on society through legal excellence." I sat at the table, having spent that week helping coordinate emergency housing for 12 families displaced by an apartment fire. But Dad's toast made no mention of my work or its impact on the community we all lived in. After dinner, When Jennifer asked about my client stories, her tone suggested she found my work interesting the way people find reality TV entertaining, dramatic but ultimately meaningless. Rachel, don't you ever get frustrated trying to help people who just make the same mistakes repeatedly? She asked. It seems like you're treating symptoms instead of addressing root causes. The question revealed fundamental misunderstanding about how social change actually works. Individual intervention and systemic advocacy aren't competing approaches, they're complementary strategies that reinforce each other. Jennifer, helping individual families access services and navigate systems is exactly how we address root causes. Policy changes happen when people understand how those policies affect real families. But wouldn't you have more impact working on policy directly? Maybe through law, or public administration, or something that influences larger populations. The suggestion that my direct service work was somehow less valuable than policy work showed how little my family understood about the connection between individual advocacy and systemic change. What they didn't know, what I'd never found a way to explain convincingly, was that my work had gained attention far beyond my immediate caseload. The intervention programs I'd developed were being studied by researchers, the policy recommendations I'd written were influencing state legislation, and my testimony before City Council had led to increased funding for youth services. But those accomplishments didn't translate into the kind of professional recognition my family understood: salary increases, partnership offers, or corporate board appointments. The text message that changed everything came on Thanksgiving morning at 9:15 a.m., just as I was preparing to drive to my parents' house for our traditional family dinner. Sorry, Rachel, but we've decided to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Just immediate family, you understand. Hope you have a lovely day, Mom. The casualness of the dismissal took my breath away. 28 years of family Thanksgivings, canceled with a text message that implied I wasn't immediate family anymore, because my career choices didn't fit their vision of success. I called Mom immediately, hoping there was some misunderstanding or logistical issue I could help solve. Mom, I got your text about Thanksgiving. Is everything okay? Oh, Rachel, yes, we're fine. We just decided to have a quieter celebration this year. More intimate, you know. Who's going to be there? Well, David and Amanda. Jennifer's bringing her boyfriend Marcus from law school, Uncle Thomas and Aunt Margaret, and a few colleagues from the firm. Nothing too elaborate. Colleagues from the firm were immediate family, but their actual daughter wasn't. The message was unmistakable. My career choices had made me an outsider in my own family. Mom, I'm your daughter. How am I not an immediate family? Rachel, don't be dramatic. It's just one holiday. We can have dinner together next week when things are less hectic. Less hectic? Mom, it's Thanksgiving. We've had dinner together every Thanksgiving since I was born. Sweetheart, honestly, sometimes your perspective on family situations can be a bit intense. We thought it might be better to keep things more professional and celebratory this year. Professional and celebratory. As if my presence somehow made family gatherings unprofessional and less worth celebrating. I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, staring at the cranberry sauce I'd been making to bring to dinner, trying to process the fact that my own family had decided I didn't belong at their Thanksgiving table. That's when my phone rang with a call that would change everything. Rachel, this is Governor Martinez's office. We've been trying to reach you all morning. I cleared my throat, surprised by the official call. This is Rachel Morrison. Rachel, congratulations. Governor Martinez has selected you to receive this year's Outstanding Public Service Award. The ceremony is tonight at 6 p.m. and it will be broadcast live on King 5 News. I nearly dropped the phone. The Governor's Award for Outstanding Public Service was the state's highest recognition for civilian achievement in community service. I knew social workers who'd been nominated but never selected. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I wasn't even aware I'd been nominated. Your nomination came from the Seattle Department of Human Services, supported by testimonials from 12 families whose lives you've directly impacted, 3 city council members, and the mayor's ICE. Your work developing the Bridge program has prevented over 400 teenagers from entering the juvenile justice system. The Bridge program. The intervention model I'd spent 3 years developing, testing, and refining, based on trauma-informed care principles and community partnership strategies. The program that had become a statewide model for youth intervention. The governor specifically wanted to recognize your work because it represents exactly the kind of innovative, effective public service that creates measurable improvements in communities. I accepted the honor, but as I hung up the phone, I realized the irony of the situation. On the same day my family had decided I wasn't worth including in their Thanksgiving celebration, the governor of Washington had decided my work was worth celebrating in front of the entire state. I spent that afternoon preparing remarks for the ceremony and thinking about the strange parallel between personal rejection and public recognition. My family's dismissal of my career had hurt deeply, but it also clarified something important. Their approval wasn't necessary for my work to have value and impact. The ceremony took place at the state capitol building, with Governor Martinez presenting awards to 5 civilians whose public service had made extraordinary contributions to their communities. The other recipients included a teacher who'd developed innovative literacy programs, a firefighter who'd created community emergency preparedness training, and a nurse who'd established mobile health clinics for rural communities. When Governor Martinez called my name, I walked to the podium where she described the Bridge program's impact on youth intervention and its adoption by social service agencies throughout the Pacific Northwest. Rachel Morrison represents the best of public service, the governor said as she handed me the award. Her innovative approach to youth intervention has prevented hundreds of teenagers from entering cycles of incarceration and has become a model for communities across our region. The live television broadcast meant thousands of people throughout Washington were watching, including, I assumed, my family as they settled in for their post-dinner relaxation. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of believing in people others had written off, about seeing potential where others saw problems, and about the power of individual intervention to create systemic change. Every teenager we help graduate, every family we connect with services, every crisis we help resolve represents not just individual success, but community investment in our collective future, I concluded. As I left the Capitol building that evening, my phone was buzzing with congratulatory messages from colleagues, clients, and community partners who'd seen the broadcast. But the call that came at 9:47 p.m. was from Mom D. Rachel? Her voice sounded completely different from the casual dismissal I'd heard that morning. We just saw the news. We saw you receive the governor's award. Oh. Hi, Mom. Rachel, we had no idea your work had gained this kind of recognition. The governor said your program is being used throughout the entire region. For the first time in years, my mother was asking about my professional accomplishments because she genuinely wanted to understand them rather than find polite ways to change the subject. The Bridge program has been adopted by social service agencies in 12 counties, I explained. We've prevented over 400 teenagers from entering the juvenile justice system by connecting them with mental health services, educational support, and family intervention. 400 teenagers? 400 teenagers. Rachel, that's extraordinary. The conversation continued for 45 minutes, with Mom asking detailed questions about my work, my recognition, and the impact that social workers could have on community welfare. Rachel, I owe you an apology. We've been treating your career like a phase you'd outgrow instead of recognizing it as the meaningful professional achievement it obviously is. Mom, you measured my success using metrics that didn't account for the kind of impact social work creates. But that doesn't mean the nail impact wasn't real or valuable. We should have been supporting you instead of suggesting you needed to find more practical work. The apology led to the most honest conversation about career and purpose that we'd ever had. Mom learned about evidence-based social work practice, policy advocacy, and the way direct service creates the foundation for systemic change. 2 days later, my entire family gathered for a make-up Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. But this time the conversation included genuine interest in my work rather than polite tolerance of my charity phase. David asked about the legal aspects of youth intervention programs. Jennifer wanted to understand how social policy translated into individual services. Even Uncle Thomas inquired about the research that supported trauma-informed care approaches. For the first time in my adult life, my professional expertise was treated as valuable knowledge rather than idealistic enthusiasm that would eventually mature into practical career thinking. Rachel, Dad said during his toast at the makeup dinner, I'm proud of the work you're doing and ashamed that it took public recognition for us to understand what you've been accomplishing. 6 months later, our family dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of asking when I'd consider more financially stable careers, my parents asked about my research findings and policy recommendations. Instead of treating my work as extended volunteer service, they recognized it as expertise that influenced how communities address complex social challenges. Most importantly, they learned That professional success can be measured by impact rather than just income, by community contribution rather than just individual advancement, and by systemic change rather than just personal achievement. The governor's award hadn't made my work more valuable, it had simply made that value visible to people who hadn't known how to recognize it before. If you're still with me, drop recognized in the comments so I know who understands that sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see our worth. The lesson I learned from being excluded from Thanksgiving wasn't about family dynamics or career validation. It was about the difference between seeking approval and building something meaningful, regardless of whether anyone understands its value. My family's dismissal of my work had been painful, but it hadn't changed the impact that work was having on the teenagers I served, the families I helped, or the community programs that were adopting my intervention model. Recognition is wonderful when it comes, but purpose doesn't require other people's understanding or approval. The most important work often happens in spaces that are invisible to people outside those fields, among populations that others prefer not to think about, addressing problems that seem too complex or overwhelming for individual intervention. Social work, like many service professions, creates value that can't always be measured by traditional success metrics. The teenager who doesn't end up in juvenile detention, the family that stays together because they got the right services at the right time, the community that becomes safer because intervention programs work, those impacts are real, even when they're not visible to people who measure success by salary and status. The most meaningful recognition often comes not from awards or media attention, but from the people whose lives are directly touched by your work. The thank you notes from families, the graduation photos from teenagers who might not have made it through high school, the policy changes that result from advocacy based on direct service experience. Those are the measures that matter most. For work that's truly about service. Tell me about a time when your family didn't understand the value of your work until they saw externally recognition of it. What was it like to have your purpose questioned by the people who should have supported it from the beginning?